Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ms McGrath, and to your officials for being here. I'm going to look at Chapter 14, or Vote 14, on measuring procurement performance, but I just wanted to pick up on something that Deputy Nash was talking about in relation to the sites under your charge and their tourism potential. So do you look at each site and look for a potential there to raise revenue from tourism? I'm talking actually, I'll explain in relation to Dole Erin, for example, these buildings. I tend to notice a lot of tourists outside the gates on weekends as they're going from one area of the city to another, stopping and taking photos. I mean, has the Dole been considered as a potential place for tourism on weekends when the house isn't sitting?
I think it is. I think for the purposes of visitors for the Houses of the Oireachtas, that's managed by the Houses of Oireachtas. But as I understand it, there are tours, and the same would be true of government buildings at weekends, but it's managed by the occupier. It isn't under the Office of Public Works for the purposes of the presentation of those sites.
My understanding was that the door was closed on Saturday.
Sorry, I thought there was.
My understanding is that the building is completely closed.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be a site managed by us. It would be under the houses.
It's not managed by OPW?
It's not, no.
So you haven't done any work on assessing tourism potential for...
Not for here.
Not
no.
for here, okay,
No.
okay.
No.
I'm trying to get into my office on the weekend and I can't, so I thought if tourists wanted to get in, I'd be able to get access as well.
All right, right. Well, I'd refer you to the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission.
Thank you. In relation to the flood... Sorry?
You'll have to hot desk.
Hot desk. Maybe you could help me, Chair.
I could, yeah.
In relation to flood defence works, if I may as well, just briefly before I go into this chapter and the vote, can you give me an update as to the exchange of information that's happening between the OPW and the Irish Insurers Federation on selected completed flood defence schemes and how that's progressing at the moment?
Under the Minister's initiative, we have engaged with the insurance industry with a view to having them have regard to those locations where we've undertaken works when they're assessing people for insurance. As you know, we don't have a role in the regulation of the insurance industry, but we would ask them to have regard. And I would understand they are. That is. I might refer to my colleague.
We're nearing agreement with the Insurance Federation on the format for the transfer of data in a format that meets their needs. And we hope that to conclude that in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
And is that, sorry, just on completed works, or is it constant provision of information as works are being completed?
It's on completed works and then keeping it updated as works are completed on other areas.
But you wouldn't, I mean, sorry, that update is only when they are completed. You wouldn't be sending information like it is now 70% complete, or we have just completed phase 1 of 3 phases.
We could certainly do it on phase basis because that would provide a level of protection to a particular area, for instance, from Oi North, for example, when it was completed. It would be little use being 70 or 80% complete on a flood scheme because the areas would still flood if a flood occurred. So.
Well, I'm thinking just in the context of Dublin South East, where you've got a flood protection works going up the Dodder, and you've got them complete at one end but not at the other. And so it does afford a certain level of protection, not complete protection in a 100-year scenario.
Well, there are phases. We're into the 4th phase, I think, of the Dodder now, going up to Donnybrook. But those other phases have provided protection in the lower end, to the Ring's End.
It has been provided to the insurers.
It hasn't yet, but the format is we're nearly at agreement with them. We've been at this for some months now, with just agreeing the actual format of the data.
And we should get that in the next 3 to 4 weeks in terms of the agreement on how that.
So yeah, if they're amenable to it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll turn now, if I can, to the chapter 14 under the vote, measuring procurement performance. Just if I may turn to I'm going to work off the chapter in the CNAG's report for 2011, and if you turn to the penultimate page of that report, 194, paragraph 14.39, it says, based on the 4 areas of procurement reviewed, the savings identified by the National Procurement Service are not reliable and are not suitable for use as a performance measure. Would you like to comment on that, Ms. McGrath, just at the outset?
We have taken on board what the controller has said in relation to how we might determine the savings, and my colleague from Public Expenditure Reform might talk about that for the future. In 2009, on the set-up of the National Procurement Service, our priority was to kind of leverage the state's covenant to maximise savings and to get contracts in place. The estimation then of the savings predicted was to an extent on estimates of how we think the use would be of the contracts. The actual data to actually enable us have actual figures for what the consumption of the products for which we were placing contracts is coming after. So we were doing estimations without the actual data. So we're very much more moving into the space of saying, taking real figures of what's happening and real comparators, so we set up a group at the end of 2012 in relation to taking the guidelines on how we kind of decide and determine savings, and that working group has taken on board what has been raised by the Controller, and it's reporting into the Office of Government Procurement now with a view to how we will do this for the future.
But does that then mean that the savings reported in 2011 are not reliable indicators of the actual savings achieved because they were estimates and we haven't yet determined the actual savings?
I would probably still say, notwithstanding what the Controller has said in the report, that they are as close in relation to the actual savings, because they're based on what we saw as the usage in earlier time, in relatively historic data. But I suppose, it is fair to say, and it's in the opening part of the Controller's chapter, that to go from an estimated annual procurement expenditure by sector from 9.3 million in 2009 to 8.6 billion rather in 2011, that's a phenomenal change in time on the totality of procurement by state bodies. I know there's a small element of capital in that. That actually is, that's real, in the sense of that's voted funds being cut, or accounting officers deciding not to purchase more than...
I mean, that's savings from people just spending less, rather than
or the vote has been cut. But what it means is it's driving them then to say we need to use the service of the National Procurement Service to generate more efficiencies in relation to how we procure it, because our resources are being cut and we don't have the capacity to do these local procurements.
So we can't necessarily say that the savings delivered in 2011 then were savings achieved by the NPS in creating greater efficiencies. More they were borne by decrease in...
sorry, in relation to the 180 million, I'm saying yes, because otherwise they would have had to have expended 216 million doing that procurement. So I am saying that.
So they are real savings.
Sorry. I'm saying how I measure them. The Controller has a differing view, and what I'm saying is, while he has a differing view, I believe those figures do stand up, but I am prepared to accept that we need to be more rigorous and stringent in how we are actually defining savings, and to take on board what he has said for future kind of determination of savings.
So by taking on board, that means you're going to change how you calculate savings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But then doesn't that then throw the figures from 2011 into uncertainty if you admit that they need to be changed, how we measure them?
There is, but I think it's reasonable, based on the figures and the assessment we had done, that to say that they're in that order.
But then you also think it's reasonable to change the method for calculation?
Well, sorry, what we're looking to do, based on where we're at now and from 2009, 10 and 11, to say, of what we have learned to date, are there better ways of kind of how we scribe savings, and taking on board what the Controller has said, that's what's going to be looked to be achieved.
Okay. That sounds to me like that the way we're calculating savings for 2011 may not stand up to actual scrutiny if we use the measures that are going to be used from here on in. So we'd arrive at different figures then.
Yeah, well, I suppose at the point where the data and the actual figures for 2011 are gathered, we then would know exactly what the savings were.
But there's a problem with data collection as well, though, isn't there?
There is.
And what's being done to address that?
I think there are various initiatives within the contract management side of the service to get more data back from suppliers where contracts we place, that they are giving us information of what's being drawn down and by whom and exactly.
Because I want to come on to the framework agreements in just a moment, but I mean, is that data then being pulled in centrally into the OPW or the MPS as to exactly what is then being done under the different framework agreements or the different contracts that are entered into? I mean, have you a bird's eye of the?
Well, we are via as we are acquiring new contracts or going out and acquiring new contracts, we're putting contract management information, making that part of what we are doing so that we are gathering back more data. But there is, you are correct, there is a work to be done in relation to overall within the whole public service as to how data on what's being bought, what's being purchased and based on contracts throughout the whole service and then within sectors as well.
And where are we with that work? Is that work, I mean, when you say it's to be done, are we?
Well, I think within the Office of Government Procurement, there is going to be areas within that, and my colleague from Public Expenditure Forum might articulate more on it, wherein category councils and sectoral management is being put in place with a view to having more systems in place to gather the data. I don't know.
Perhaps I could intervene here. Paul Quinn is my name. I'm the newly appointed Chief Procurement Officer. Joined the Civil Service at the end of January, and I'm responsible for putting into place the new Office for Government Procurement. I think what the Chairman has articulated is probably fairly typical in terms of both government procurement and private procurement in terms of the challenges in measuring the benefits. And I think it reflects what is a natural evolution in the approaches and the methodologies in measurement. It doesn't discredit previous measurements. What it recognises is, as you put in place better processes and systems, your accuracy by which you measure your savings actually improves. So at this moment in time, as the Chairman has articulated, we're dealing with quite a significant number of contracting entities who put in place the various frameworks and implement them. They may implement them at different times, and that leads to a degree of uncertainty as to when those savings actually arise. As we put in place the new arrangements for the Office of Government Procurement, we will standardise the methodologies and we will build upon the work that has been undertaken by the NPS under the umbrella of the OPW in improving those measures and moving towards a more robust methodology for saving as we improve those systems. And as we roll out particularly the new office in this year and towards the back end of this year, will improve the methodologies for capturing those savings. But we have to be clear that while our systems capabilities remain very poor and will require investment over the next number of years, it's only as those systems get put into place that we'll be able to significantly improve the accuracy of our measurements. So to some degree, we will still have to rely upon estimates in terms of the benefits. Those estimates will be done in a clear way, in a defined way, in an auditable way that will lend credibility to them. But it will be a journey in improving our reporting.
And the timeline for that then, are we talking about 2014, the report of the CNAG, and that year before actually looking at those new methodologies in practice for?
Well, we are currently building upon the work that has been undertaken within the NPS, and we'll bring that to conclusion within the next number of months. We will then issue that guidance to all procuring entities so that we can collectively report in a standardised way and against a written documented methodology. I guess what it will reflect is that the numbers reported in 2014 for 2013 will be against a new standard, but an evolving one. And then next year, as we put in better systems this year, we'll be able to yet again evolve those standards and yet again improve the accuracy of the reporting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Mr. McGrath, just in relation to the framework agreements then, is every public body using a framework agreement for their procurement?
There are multiple framework agreements depending on the nature of the product, and we don't yet have the data on. We're gathering the data on the mandatory contracts, which became mandatory in the course towards the end of 2012. As to now, the compliance with that, or the take-up rather, by public authorities of those mandatory contacts. And we require to go, we're doing it on a quarter, so the information is really coming through now on the first quarter. So I can provide the committee with data on the take-up, but it's as I understand it, about 194 million of 221 million is mandatory frameworks, and so how well then people are doing in relation to that, I can revert with some detail. People are, contracting authorities are moving to using the mandatory frameworks. It will be the case that there will be contracting authorities who have extant contracts in place for maybe something that's under the framework. They will continue to use that until that runs out. Others may find that they are choosing to go other ways. They then will be asked to comply or explain.
You're anticipating a lack of compliance by certain public bodies in using the framework agreement?
Well, I can absolutely anticipate it for those who have contracts at the moment that are in those areas. The case is they have a contract with a different supply or a different contract. So until that lapses, or the times.
You just said a moment ago that there will be some who are not going through the framework agreement for whatever reason, and you'll have to figure out then and oblige them to go through a framework agreement.
It will be a question of them, if they are not, to comply or explain.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would imagine the controller may have a view in relation to that when he's looking at accounts.
And will you name those public bodies that are not complying?
Sorry. Well, I would imagine ultimately they will be, but I maybe within the Office of Government Procurement as it's set up as to how it will be treated.
Because my understanding is from the figures that the framework agreements are very successful.
Yes, in terms of, yes, what they're achieving.
And so we want everyone to be using them where they should be using them, and even where they shouldn't if they could be.
Yes.
You know, I mean, we want to
Yes.
get this to be the standard across the industry of the public sector.
I have no information that's saying there's a kind of a willful non-compliance with the mandatory frameworks, but people will have to report on that. But I'm not aware that that's the case.
But do you know yet that if it comes to be the case that some are not, will you publish that information?
I wouldn't see any reason why it wouldn't be published,
Okay. Okay.
but
Thank
it
you.
may not be a matter for me.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Just moving on then to 14.16 under the CNHE's report, paragraph 14.16 and figure 14.3, which is talking about procurement savings calculation methodologies. And in the first sentence, it just says, during this examination, MPS provided details of estimated savings in 2011 of 46.5 million from a range of cost-saving and cost-avoidance measures. And we have a table then in 14.3 of those. But you don't disaggregate that data between cost savings and cost avoidance.
No, no.
Why don't you do that?
Well, it's about how your earlier point in relation to how we are calculating these. There is an element where cost avoidance, the use of central frameworks. There's international benchmarks of 36,000 for centralised procurement of an individual contract and 6,000 for a decentralised one. So when you're saying there's a framework in place and there are 200 bodies who will avail of it or are availing of it, there then your saving is 200 by the 6,000 as distinct from 136,000 for the central procurement. So there is an element where that's factored into this in terms of the avoidance of costs. For example, in relation to the placing of the e-tenders contract, how that saving is measured is by the fact of not having to advertise. And so it's a cost avoided. Advertising on e-tenders means you don't have to put ads in, and we have measured that based on putting in a number of ads. And I know what the controller has said in relation to that, but it is a cost avoided using e-tenders. And
define criteria then for distinguishing between cost avoidance and cost saving. Is there a standard across the public sector as to calculating that?
Well, I think the thing would have to be, it's individual to the type of procurement and maybe the type of product you are. There will have to be different definitions depending on what's being acquired. That's if you. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
to add to that, this is part of the methodologies I mentioned earlier that we will and are currently standardising our definitions for cash savings, cost avoidance, and pay cost avoidance as well. So there's a number of various different benefits that the procurement activity can drive. Some of that is bottom line cash, some of that is non-cash, like cost avoidance, say in an inflationary market.
But then, so in terms of the level of detail then and making that disaggregation of the numbers, we'll be able to achieve that under the new methodologies. We'll be able to say this is the amount cost saving, this is the amount cost avoidance, and it won't be lumped together into a single figure.
That is exactly how we will be reporting in the future.
Okay, that's very helpful. Because when you look at the table 14.3, and you look at stationery, paper and envelopes, 2011